the 7th, 2023. I'm sorry we were late. I have been a little bit under the weather, and as you can tell, I'm carrying a little bit of a frog with me. Joe Trippi was just with us. He bounced out. I'm sure he'll be right back. Joining me this evening, our Lincoln Project senior advisor, longtime Republican strategist, and author of It Was All a Lie, Stuart Stevens. Stu, welcome to the show.
Thank you, brother. Hope you're feeling better.
Thank you so much. And a long-time friend of mine, bona fide freedom fighter in the trenches of Eastern Europe over the decades, a man who runs a company called Viking Strategies, LLC, and has been, I would say, a cornerstone of understanding how to unlock the anti-democratic movement that is going on in this country, Trygve Olsen. Trygve, welcome.
Thanks, Reed. It's good to be here.
All right, so guys, tonight we want to talk a little.
We got Joe.
Then Joe's there, and then he's gone, and then he's there, and then he's gone.
I'm back.
And don't touch anything. Oh, okay. Oh, I'm going to keep going while Joe figures it out. So, guys, this past weekend, we saw CPAC 2023. Trygve, when you and I went, it was always a collection of very, how shall I say, interesting individuals. Certainly not people as at least to me anyway, I'll speak for myself, a member of the bona fide establishment, that I was really interested to see what sort of the younger / activist sort of, people that wore blue blazers and red ties to school every day, libertarian set were into. I saw Rand Paul give a very interesting speech there once. A lot of atheists, a lot of weed, a lot of guns, right? It's always been a weird thing, but it's certainly metastasized since Trump. And the weirdness was compounded this year between, Trump getting back in the election already for 2024, match slapped with his now well-publicized issues with allegedly groping a man. This is a man who claims to be a staunch Catholic. And then all of the insanity that comes along with being part of MAGA. Now Trygve's gone too, so I don't know what's happening. So Stu, I'm going to go to you. So okay. Seeing and listening what you've seen, what's going on?
Look, I think it's fascinating about CPAC at the moment is that it is just so predictably following a line of what always happens with radical movements.
Right.
So the purity test that was the most pure last year becomes unacceptable this year, and we become more and more. You just can't do enough, and this is the pattern. The Red Guard took. This is a pattern. This is how Trotsky ended up getting murdered in Mexico City.
Right. Nobody wants an ice pick to the back of the neck.
Okay. There you go. It's the Night of the Long Knives in Germany. And what I find most disturbing about CPAC is it was always this kind of odd group of people, sometimes well-intentioned, sometimes just odd. But you never really thought like what happens in this room could really affect like the course of world history.
Right.
But that is what's happening now because of their support for Putin. And I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that if the pro-Putin wing of American politics is in the Republican Party, second most important member of the House, Marjorie Taylor Greene, has said she thinks we should give no money to Ukraine, which guarantees a Putin victory. That what happens at CPAC and its manifestations in the Republican Party could alter the course of world events. It could win the war for Putin, and that's just so incredibly disturbing.
So, Stuart, the conservative, political action conference or whatever they call it, it was always a very specific brand of conservative or Republican. Yeah, right? You and I had a conversation last week where I noted that I was always a Republican and never a conservative. And there were Republicans that weren't. There were conservatives who weren't Republicans, and there were Republican conservatives. This was always a very specialized brand, of folks. Reagan, famously made a big thing of it in the 80s after he took office, sort of rallied the base troops of a surging then in the early 80s Republican movement, conservative movement. Much of it, probably based in religious circles. Maybe there were some libertarians sprinkled in, but anyway, it gave him sort of an army, right? A political army that he could go
Yeah.
out and count on. And it became, the people who did make up the grassroots activism of the Republican Party, which I was never a part of. But now you take it and it's Trump's part of it. And, people are making fun of the empty seats. And I think that is notable, right? First of all, it's an off year. Second of all, CPAC has significant internal and now external issues.
Right.
Lastly is, if it was a truly competitive primary, here's the other thing too, where Trump wasn't in it, then you would have seen all the Republican candidates there doing their dog and pony show.
Reed, that's a point that people haven't made enough. That's a really interesting, smart point, because, in years past, going there and winning the straw poll was, it wasn't as big as winning the Iowa straw poll, but it was seen as something that would give you a jump start in fundraising. It would help you carve out a certain niche.
You could go recruit staff potentially.
Yeah, and you could recruit staff. It was seen as an important part of the party.
Right.
I've been thinking about this a lot with these Dominion lawsuit revelations. Mm-hmm. To me, the difference, between center-left press, mainstream press, which is very few of them are Republicans, which I think does tend to orient by not deliberate bias, I think, as much as sort of worldview, background, people that went to the same schools, sort of a more liberal view. But if you think about it, what Fox News and that propaganda wing of the Republican Party, it really reflects what the party is saying. Mm-hmm. They were perfectly okay with Mitt Romney, and they were perfectly okay with Donald Trump. And you think about it, if Barack Obama had gone out and called for a Muslim ban, say, I'm a Christian, I'm going to call for a Muslim ban, the New York Times wouldn't have backed him. The Washington Post wouldn't have backed him. MSNBC wouldn't have backed him. He would have been held accountable for it. And by the Russians being able to elect a candidate in Donald Trump, they bought themselves this whole party propaganda apparatus. I mean, what Fox is doing is chasing the party. It's not leading the party. And you saw that in their frantic emails that they were losing viewers if they tried to do anything that was against the party. And that gives something like CPAC this sort of exponential influence.
Yeah.
Because it's influencing the party, and I think the party is really what is determining the direction of the propaganda wing.
Right. So, Trigby, before we dropped, right after you dropped, we started talking about, people were making fun of the empty seats. It's an off year. It's not really a competitive primary, if it ever will be. But I want to talk about the concentration of MAGA at CPAC within the Republican Party, because this to me is an important part too, which is there may be less overall people who consider themselves Republicans anymore. And that's a very broad statement, I understand. But those that do probably tend to be more purified in their belief systems towards what a Trump is. And frankly, even what a Ron DeSantis is, because the difference between Trump and DeSantis is really aesthetic, not much else.
Yeah, I mean, I think here's the thing. First off, if the ultra MAGA wing of the American electorate is 10%, right? Probably still comprises 35% of the Republican primary electorate, right? So
at least, if not more.
At least maybe 40. And I think we're going to see. I'm working on a project where we're going to try and quantify that. And so when you look at Donald Trump's speech, I mean, what struck me is that was not a speech that was about advocating big ideas. It wasn't a speech that was about trying to attract new voters with ideas. All of the things that Ronald Reagan tried to use CPAC to do, all the things that, quite frankly, I think CPAC was founded to do.
Right.
It was about unleashing grievance and anger and hostility and to radicalized people. In some cases, and I think Stuart was alluding to this, in some cases, to people that they should be on Vladimir Putin's side in attacking NATO's headquarters,
Right.
rather than on America's side. So as far as Fox goes, the truth of the matter is Fox was doing what they were doing, and they discovered extremism is a good business model. Outrage is a great business model. P.T. Barnum knew that before. The problem is that in politics, making politics the foundation of that, Donald Trump came along and personified it within the political process, and now he owns Fox News because he can destroy them. And that's what's really coming out. And he could do the same to CPAC, probably.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is Stuart. I think we sometimes make medical analogies or whatever it is. Is the patient, has the disease metastasized? Is it overtaken the body? Is it whatever it is? But it seems now that this is a situation the Republican Party finds itself in, and it can be personified in a Donald Trump. Or it can be more broad in the idea of a MAGA or an ultra MAGA. But is electorally speaking, it sure feels like, nationally anyway, that for the Republican Party, and they can't live with MAGA and they can't live without it. They can't. None of them can get through primaries, and we're already starting to see Kerry Lake in Arizona, Blake Masters in Arizona, Doug Mastriano in Pennsylvania. These very, very, kooky out there people starting to say that they're going to run for U.S. Senate seats in 2024. Anthony Gonzalez down in Texas, who's a sort of pro-immigration Republican's already picked up 2 MAGA primary challengers, and we're 9 months from a filing deadline down there.
Right.
And so what you see is that you can't live with them because they'll never leave you alone. You need them to get through a primary. But that act is sort of the catch-22. It's the frog and the scorpion.
Well, look,
right?
my feeling about this is the responsibility of this. The party can't get out of responsibility by saying, Fox News made the party crazy. I mean, let's think about it. Fox News, at its peak, got less than half the audience of Storage Wars. I mean, HGTV gets half the audience, and HGTV isn't ending democracy, doesn't have the power to. The reason Fox News has power is because the party has given it power. And if these senators, all these people we know, some of them we helped to elect, a lot of them, had they come out maybe 4 days after the election and congratulated the president-elect of the United States, right? Not a radical statement, okay? I mean, we're not asking them to go charge a machine gun or,
right.
Put themselves at risk. Like congratulating the winner of the presidential, it's pretty standard. Had they done that, it would have isolated Trump. And it wouldn't have stopped Trump from saying all the stuff he would have said, but I think that it would have been a center of gravity that would have completely changed the events that unfolded. So it's a classic example. I mean, this is 1930s Germany. It is just what happens if you just, why not just humor him? I mean, you had people saying that in the Senate, and they found out what happens. They were running for their lives on January 6th. And the has just collapsed. I could, if you held a gun to my head and said, what does it mean to be an American conservative today? I'd say, shoot me. I mean, hell if I know. There is nothing. What are the principles to it? Except beating Democrats.
So Trigby, in the first Jason Bourne movie with Matt Damon kills a fellow assassin played by Clive Owen. And as he's laying there in the field dying, Clive Owen looks up at him and goes, look what they make you give. Look what they make you give. Right? Then you see Nikki Haley on the stage this weekend reading from a speech in which she said, wokeness is more dangerous than any pandemic could ever be.
Right.
Like, look what they made Nikki Haley give, and she gave it.
Yeah, and she'll keep giving, right? Like,
I hope she felt as bad about saying it as she looked reading it.
Yeah, I just think, there's no amount of prostituting themselves, anybody, and appeasing that is ever enough for the autocratic actor. I mean, the reality is, look at these guys on TV every night. I think it's Julia Davis on Twitter. People who aren't following her should, because she has these Russian propagandists on every night. Just basically, they're like Baghdad Bob. It's going great in Ukraine. We're doing
Right.
fantastic. And that's what they end up doing. I mean, you just have to keep appeasing them. I think, though, Stuart, and I love your thoughts on this, guys. I actually think with the Fox News thing, right? Um, that that the reason that you get this narrative that Fox News is responsible and that Fox News can control it is because they don't want to admit the emperor has new clothes, and that you have a radicalized base in the Republican Party that will leave the party if Donald Trump leaves with it, and they'll leave Fox News if Donald Trump leaves with it, and they will go wherever he wants them to go. And so by saying, oh, well, Fox News can kind of fix this, um, I think that's them trying to say,
No,
oh, well,
that
the
is.
donors can fix it or whoever, right?
Listen, I think that's a really important point. This is, well, she wore a short skirt. She had it coming. Um,
Yes,
it's trying to abdicate any responsibility.
Sure.
And
exactly.
this all goes back to when Trump in December of 2015 called for a Muslim ban. And what Reince Priebus should have done, he should have said, look, I can't stop people from voting for Donald Trump. I can't stop Donald Trump from running. But if anything we stand for, it's the Constitution, and this is a religious test. So as long as I'm in the party, we're not going to do this. Now, that may mean I shouldn't lead this party. That's fine. But once they just went along with it, and it was the same thing. They still were afraid of Trump running as an independent. They thought Trump would lose, so they could just humor this. And this is where you end up. And you have to be willing to lose to stand for anything. Say what you will about Lee Atwater, but he used to have a phrase. I'm old enough to have worked with Lee when I was coming up. He would say, you got to dig the ditch you're willing to die in.
Right.
And the party, it's just become about winning just for the sake of power. And it completely destroys any sort of governing philosophy. It really destroys the center-right conservatism in this country, because if Marjorie Taylor Greene is center-right conservatism, that's the death of conservatism. And I think it only gets worse. I mean, Trevor, you've studied this and lived it in the East Bloc countries and the old Soviet countries that have, from back to the days when they were behind the Iron Curtain. I mean, doesn't this just get worse?
Yeah, it does get worse. I mean, I think this. I think we're entering between now and January 20th, 2025 at noon, perhaps the most dangerous period for the Republic since the Civil War, not just domestically, but internationally and just in general. But it all comes back to that division here at home, right? The thing that if you're sitting in Beijing or you're sitting in Moscow or you're sitting in our allies' capitals is, can we trust America? And when you have that level of uncertainty about the country that is responsible for keeping global shipping lanes open and keeping the peace and whose currency is the reserve currency, and you have uncertainty about whether the debt ceiling is going to get raised and all of this crazy here, it makes it incredibly dangerous. I think if the Republican Party, there's a good chance that the DeSantis wing and the Trump wing, they have a civil war within the party itself, and those who care about democracy are able to erect enough firewalls to keep people along Bannon lines, and swing voters with Joe Biden.
But let me ask you that though.
We could lose.
What does a DeSantis wing of the party look like? Candidly, I mean, I'm asking. I don't know. Who are they?
Oh, I think it's all these guys who misguidedly think that Ron DeSantis is somehow going to upend Trump, and then our problem is solved. Like he
I
can,
think it's people that would not be embarrassed if Ron DeSantis came to dinner.
That's my point.
Yeah.
It's an aesthetic choice, not a
Totally,
substantive one.
it is a class distinction.
Yeah.
Same with Nick. If you these donors, they're all people, and they're giving money to her, and it's just a fantasy. They are the Prussian aristocrats who enabled Hitler. They are Franz von Papen.
All right, so Joe,
that is what they are.
So Joe, you've had the three. We've had the three. Welcome. I was about to throw you out again, but I decided to take pity on you. So you had the three vestigial Republicans talk about CPAC and the insanity. Take it from the Democratic perspective. What did you see, and what do you think that means for the sort of macro political outlook here in the near term?
Well, first of all, I've always thought CPAC was weird and
you're right,
crazy, but it was, it was, I guess, at least publicly sort of respectable years back. It's just, I mean, it's just unbelievable what this clown car looked like, and I hesitate to call it that because I agree with Trig. It's so dangerous. But here's what it's when you see a cult start to kill its own off out of purity, is what I think you're seeing. And I think part of that is that, so it's only going to get darker.
Yep.
It's not going to get better. It's going to get darker, meaner, angrier, more out for retribution. And that's why Trump went there. And there's no getting around it. It's now like spiraling down into more darkness, more conspiracies, more anger, retribution,
and meaner,
lashing out, and meaner, exactly. And I do think that's dangerous for a whole bunch of reasons, but primarily because I think it's gonna fuel some things. Some people out there, I mean, some people take these suggestions and run with them, and we've seen that. But I think that even that's going to get more pronounced, and more provocative, and more dangerous.
Well, that's isn't that what Tucker Carlson?
So Stuart, let me ask, because I want to ask that, because I have this theory. It's not yet a law, but it's getting close to it, of political dynamics, at least within the MAGA world, which is, when one of these people, no matter how far down the path towards ultra MAGA they've gone, when they come to a fork in the road that allows moderation and at least a nod back to normal, or provides a set of stairs deeper into the abyss, they always take the stairs. And Tucker Carlson did that last night. We know that he knows the 2020 election was not stolen. Right? We know that. There is court evidence that says that. Now he gets a hold of the January 6th tapes for whatever reason, does whatever basically random edit job on them, doesn't show anything, and just goes out and says, January 6th was peaceful, this is all BS, and oh, by the way, the 2020 election was stolen from the American people.
Yeah. Look, I mean, this is Putin. This is the death of truth. And, Timothy Snyder talks about the politics of inevitability and the politics of eternity. And when we came up in the Republican Party, it was the politics of inevitability, that Ronald Reagan was up there, that this country will always go forward, that immigrants, we are an immigrant nation, that's made it. And that was Barack Obama's politics. It was the politics, the history bends, arc of history. What you have now in the Republican Party is the politics of eternity, where it's not about accomplishing anything, it's about the fight. And the politics of eternity require ignoring truth, because things are getting better. It requires being able to rewrite history. So when they say Democrats are the real racist, and Putin says Ukraine is full of Nazis. Well, both of those were true at one time. They're just not true in this moment. So, yes, in Reconstruction, Republicans were the voice of civil rights. Yes, there were a lot of Nazis in 1943 in Ukraine. It destroys any sense of reality and a sense of a shared history. So they just say it, and it becomes true enough that they can get by with it.
But that downward spirals that's why Nikki Haley, Scott, I mean, that's why they're all, I mean, even what we would have called the optimists, the positive look to the future, are turning darker and moving deeper into it. And that's why I think it's because it's the same way you're moving to win, your party. Well, this is what you stoked your party into becoming, and what Tucker Carlson is stoking.
It's about the party,
and it is now the only way to keep them happy is to make them angrier and meaner. And
so
so you got to up the drip, right? You got to up the IV drip, but at some point you're going to kill the patient, right?
But it's psychological,
or the country. I mean, or the country. I mean, because I mean, that's what I mean. I mean, how much hotter can this get before
until it's violent? That's where it goes. It goes to violence.
Yeah, that's
but that's because you literally have an element. I think it's about 10% of the whole electorate, and it's on the right mostly, by far, by multiples. That is radicalized. They have need. America is under threat. They have network. Join fellow patriots here on the mall to defend your country. And they have narrative. And they keep getting narrative. We're going to walk down to the Capitol. That was need, network, and narrative on January 6th. Tucker Carlson is giving them need, network, and narrative every night. And the reality is those people think they're patriots. They believe that their values, which they believe are traditional values, are under assault. They're nationalists. And they will make common cause. Like the whole Putin thing, I think, is that they've actually gotten themselves to such a warped place that they'll make common cause with anyone that they think will stand up to the enemy. And they think Biden and the left is the enemy, bigger enemy.
But I think with Putin, let me just say this. I think with Putin, they see Putin's Russia as the ideal. It's white.
They should go spend some time there.
They should go live there for a while.
There are no women, and we know, as Putin has said, there are no non-heterosexuals in Russia. And it is a country where it is this sort of ideal of what they want.
And it's openly racist.
It's incredibly
it's an openly racist, chauvinist society. So, Joe?
Yeah, no, I was going to say, I saw Ken Burns today, I think it may have been CNN, but he talked about this and said that, the whole thing here is it's the us and them.
Yep.
And when you hear somebody with this kind of vitriol, anger, talking about us and them, saying them, move away, walk away from it. There's only us. And the problem is there's no one in the Republican Party prepared to say that. No one.
Okay.
And that's why there's no way out. It will always be, there will always be them. And whether it's immigrants, Democrats, socialists, whatever, and they now have to create more evil them and get their people more. I mean, it is a downward spiral that I think it's clear to me that it's going to become a increasingly violent, particularly as they lose. Right? I mean, if they continue to fail at the ballot box, which we all work every day to make sure happens, then there's the only way out for them is, with the way Tucker and everybody stoking them, is to go get your own retribution. I didn't win it for you. I wasn't your vehicle for retribution. They'll seek other ways, and that's what's and there's no one in the party strong enough, not strong, just with the decency to say it out loud and to try to get people
courage.
to see. Yeah, courage.
So, Trigby, let me ask about those types of people, because there were a bunch of Republican senators today who decried what Carlson did on Fox last night. But, that's not surprising. Mitch hates Trump. He hates Fox. He hates all of this. He wants his good old, regular order back, where he can, cut all the deals he wants and do everything he wants to do and have a bust in the hallway and all the other stuff. But on the House side, crickets, right? Including from the 70 or so members of the Republican House who consider themselves quote unquote moderates. So if I want to take them to task for their silence about this stuff, am I being the extremist because I'm taking on the quote unquote good Republican? Or are they just deeper and deeper into Vichy France because they know it's even more wrong than it's ever been, but because, as Stuart said, it's all really just about holding onto your seat, that they're just going to hope it passes them by and they can survive a primary and get to November of 24. But where am I supposed to stand with them?
Here's the thing. Like, truth and reconciliation is a real thing. Oops. Go ahead,
Trig.
No. So truth and reconciliation is a real thing, and the Republican Party is going to have that.
Yeah.
Well, but
that's not
the model for that. How does the model for that in South Africa? How does that apply here? I mean,
here's what I would say. This is what I would say. The way that the model applies here is they're going to need to lose successive elections, one after another. Yeah. And the challenge that we have on the pro-democracy side, I was saying this to somebody who's a really kind of like prominent Democrat. The reality is we can't fool ourselves. We have two things going on simultaneously, and we have to be able to do them. We have to defeat the illiberal candidates and the radicalized and extremist candidates, and we have to stop them simultaneously from starting, a violent revolution at the same time. And we can't make the mistake that was made in 2020, which was we beat Donald Trump, but we allowed him to continue doing what he was doing. And to Reed's point, that's a big piece of this. Everybody likes to say how great Don Bacon is as a defender of democracy. I haven't heard him say jack diddly about what Tucker was doing. And last time I checked, if the mob had gotten their hands on Don Bacon, not that they'd have known who the hell he was, but if they had gotten their hands on Don Bacon, he'd have been
in bad shape.
I don't know. He'd have been toast.
Yep.
All right, so guys, where do we go from here then? Because, this will just be the first of these confabs. A bunch of these potential candidates, that are going to run against Trump didn't show up. We're going to get deeper into primary season here. We're now probably, I'd assume, Joe, you'd know the calendar better than any of us, less than a year from a caucus or a primary somewhere. The campaigns that haven't yet started are probably champing at the bit to do so. DeSantis is in a little bit different case because his legislature just opened, and theoretically he should have plenty of money to get an operation started. But we're going to see more visits to Iowa. We're going to see more visits to New Hampshire, more visits in South Carolina. So is there going to be any distinguishing feature of these people other than we've lost 7 of the 8, last elections? Wokeism is worse than COVID. Like, what do you think we're going to see?
I think you're going to see a spiral to appeal to the anger and the retribution needs of the base. That's what you're seeing. I mean, Larry Hogan takes a pass, right? Anybody who doesn't want to go there doesn't have the ambition to play that game, even if they're smart enough to know in their heads that it's just a game, but they're going to play it. That includes Nikki. Haley.
Right.
I mean, they're all going to do it, and so it'll be even more outlandish. What is the most outlandish thing you can and painful thing you can do to this group, or to call out that group, or
Right.
to stoke anger
So,
towards towards
yeah, I mean,
a
it
different
used
group?
to
That's
be,
what they're going to do.
I mean, it used to be that politics, I think there was both Republican and Democrat, but we would have said it was more on the Republican side, was about making you feel better about being American. Good American. Now, Republican Party is all about making you feel bad about being an American. And what it is, now we have to go out and get, and that's really code for making you feel bad about being an oppressed white person in America. Because we know how oppressed white people are in America, and we know how oppressed heterosexuals are in America. And the party used to fight big stuff. We used to fight, tear down this wall. Now it's tear down this bathroom. Where have you gone? It's only going to get worse.
Well, because it has to get worse, because if it doesn't get worse, then there's no reason for them to be, right?
But that's the whole psychology of extremism, right?
Right.
Once they reach a point of overconfidence, I talk about this all the time. Once they reach that point of overconfidence in the rightness of the simplistic answers they're accepting, they need the dopamine hit of somebody to be intolerant towards. And I will say the one opportunity that will arise as the primaries unfold is, Marjorie Taylor Greene may want to talk about dividing and starting a civil war in America. We have to all get together and start a civil war in the Republican Party and get them as best we can fighting amongst themselves. Because remember, it's never enough. So Nikki Haley can appease Donald Trump, but at some point, he's likely to go after her. And we have to push that.
Well, and that's the thing. We've talked about the conventional nature of the rest of these candidates and their campaigns. Is that, when he attacks her, Joe, they're going to, we respectfully disagree with President Trump or blah, 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 or they'll say no comment, right? But they'll be shell shocked in whatever crappy headquarters they rented in Charleston, right?
Yeah, but I mean, I think even we get caught in this a little bit about sort of the way parties and inter-party fights happen. They're not. It's not the same anymore, right? I mean, this isn't a fight about conservative values in the party. In other words, we have extremes in both parties. We always had, right? I mean, and they always want to take the party further to the left or to the right normally than the party writ large wants to go or probably should to be successful. But those were kind of left right. That's not what this is. This is authoritarian power grab. That's what it is. And so now to appease that in the base, that's where the base wants to be. They want a strong authoritarian who's going to take on their enemies and get retribution for them. And that means this is not a party fight where, it's the rhinos versus the Tea Party, right? This is a completely different kind of fight, and I don't see anybody willing to take on that fight in the party. In other words, the people who could have made those arguments are not running. They're not going to,
because they're afraid.
They would get creamed, and they're afraid. They're afraid for their safety. Right?
Well, look, I was on the phone with some people today from Texas, and they said that DeSantis was flying around Texas last week, meeting with some of the biggest heavy hitter Republican donors down there. And they said, and these people, they got a lot of money, they got a lot of sway. I'm like, yeah, but they don't have a lot of people. They got a lot of zeros behind their name, but they don't have a lot of people. And that's what Trump has. I said, also, if these people were really, and they said they never want Trump, never want Trump, never Trump, the DeSantis, which again to me is aesthetic, not substantive. But I said, well, look, if they were really interested in this, then they would have lined something up that was doing nothing but nuking Trump 24/7.
Yep.
But you know what? They don't want to do that. You know why? They're afraid of it. They see what happens.
Yeah, Bush.
But we have been through this, right? We have all now collectively been through this. We've come out through the other side. The question is, do they even want to approach the door they've got to walk through? And so, Stu, in these last few minutes, you and Trig, is there anything that can make them approach that hot stove and be willing to touch it, knowing what's going to happen, but also knowing you can't win if you don't do it?
Well, I think the only thing that'll affect people is when they see it hurt them personally. So if all these good Republicans that they support crash the debt ceiling, and they see their portfolios go down, they see the dollar threatening, not to be the reserve currency, they'll get real concerned in a hurry. But otherwise, I think they're completely isolated from what happens. And I don't think that they're what they don't understand is that they have lost power. All of these people backed Jeb Bush. All of them gave $100 million to Jeb Bush, which was a lot of money in 2015 to his super PAC. And it didn't mean shit.
Right.
And, this is a point you've made over and over, Reed, and you're exactly right. Trump doesn't need a conventional campaign. And what these people are about is the funding of a traditional campaign. So,
Joe, go ahead, and then Trig.
What I would say is this: is what I was trying to say. Maybe I complete the thought. In the past, if a party ideologically was going to the extremes, the left was, in the Democratic Party, lost a whole string of elections in the 80s, 84, 88, till Clinton came around along in 92. But it's always been a problem for the party when it chose to go into the extremes of its base. The difference here is this isn't ideological. Therefore, the more authoritarian, the more mean this gets, the more they try to out fuel this. I think it is going to repel the rest of the country. In other words, because it's going to such an extreme. It's not ideological. It's all power, and it's all ugly, mean, and vindictive and retribution seeking. I mean, that Trump, even Trump was, in that sense, darker than he's ever been, I think. Darker than American Carnage when he's talking about, I am your retribution. I think as they try to outdo each other, this could be this could really start to move enough to really build the Bannon line. I mean, to make it much bigger over time. Not within the party anymore. The party's broken and mean. I'm talking about people who finally say, no, I can't. I'm not doing this. I know you guys got there, a whole lot of people very early. A whole lot of other people have got there, but this could be what it takes to as they get uglier, meaner, and more authoritarian, and it exposes it. I mean, with what DeSantis is doing, and a lot of his, the bills he's passing and signing and taking such glee in, I think it really could expose how ugly the party's gotten in a way that even Trump by himself hasn't been able to do, with the way 6 or 7 of these candidates fighting over it, or even just 3 of them, can put on display what the party really has become, showing that it's not Trump. It's not just Trump. It's the whole thing is part of it.
All right, Trig, bring us home, man.
I mean, I think 2 things. One, for people who are watching, as you're listening to, whether it's the pundits or others, always keep in mind that in this particular case, there's the elections, which they know well, And then there's the game that we're in, and it's hard because the rules of that game are a completely different set of rules. And there's a tendency of these donor class and like the elites in America not to understand that the rules of the game have completely changed. The second thing is, as Joe said, um, the Bannon line is key. There's the potential to expand it, but we also have to understand that we have to keep pounding away every day counter narratives to those people because, quite frankly, Trump and that right is going to try and suck them back in. Joe Biden is a socialist. He's ruining America. All of that stuff with people in my home state of Wisconsin, right? You have a whole lot of people who voted for Tony Evers and Ron Johnson. Pause and think about that for a minute. Those are the people that are going to decide whether Joe Biden wins or Ron DeSantis or Donald Trump wins. And it all comes down to, are they going to pull the Evers lever or the Johnson lever? We got to be counter programming them, or not counter programming, but counter. We got to make sure we're providing counter information to them.
Well, absolutely. Yep. And guys, that's why here at resolutesquare.com, your membership and support, reading our stuff, sharing our stuff is so important, so critically important to the mission of preserving American democracy. I want to thank all of you for joining us tonight. I want to thank Joe and Stu and Trygve for taking me on this ride this evening. I hope everybody out there stays happy and healthy, and we will see you next time. Take care, everybody.
Feel better, Reed.
Thanks.
Yeah, get better.